today we're going to be talking about is going to be mastery. And kind of, a lot of people talk about mastery. What are some ways to obtain it, or, some, metaphysics, or some people that have actually done it and were successful in what they were doing. But we're actually going to get a little bit deeper and closer to the essence of mastery that might or might not be something that you've probably thought of or seen anybody else do. So the first one is that, mastery. And so mastery, what's the opposite of mastery? Foolishness, apprenticeship, ignorance. That might be the opposite of mastery. But when we look at it as a relationship, right, a comparison, we can understand that if we have an infinite spectrum of possibilities, right, and somebody is right here, let's just say that's the beginner, and then somebody's right here, well, they'd be considered the master, or more masterful than the beginner. Now, if somebody was further along and a spectrum moved towards an idea of perfection or totality, the person who would be ahead would be considered the master, or the master's master, or the supreme whatever, right? So somebody who's incredibly proficient, something so like it's a standard or a comparison, right? So that might also be it. Mastery also refers to somebody exemplifying behaviors, right? So mastery isn't a thing, it's an idea that we ascribe to something else, right? It's a, mastery of cobblering, right? Mastery of fixing and making shoes, right? Well, does being a master in cobblering mean that you're a master in tennis? No, right? Nor do they have anything to do with each other. But so mastery isn't transcendent to different parts of knowledge or whatever. It's the thing that it's about. And cobblering, ing, is a verb. It's what somebody does, right? So it's all in relation to verbs, right? So the comparison of what somebody does. Okay, that's what we consider another aspect of mastery. The fool and the master are pretty much the same. They both have a relationship. They're both in relationship to each other, and they're both operating in the same arena, right? And so both of their goals, no matter how good or bad they are, is realizing more and more knowledge, more and more capacity, and more ability to actually do what they choose to. And the master has more facility to bring about what's in their mind or themselves, and we'll get into that into the world, right? Okay, so that's another one. Let's see. Mastery of breathing. Anybody like no. So it has to be something that isn't just a given, right? Living things have certain processes that they need to survive, right? Are you a master? Is anybody a master walker? But you can master breathing techniques, right? Techniques, right? It's a specific way of doing something, right? Instead of just doing blank or whatever, there's a quote unquote hierarchy of things that are better than others, right? So there's an idea that there's wisdom, right? If a certain action is no better than any other, then there's no difference between the master and the fool. There's no difference between the painting of a master and the painting of somebody who is an apprentice or just a beginner, because there's no nuance and distinction and I don't know if you want to say brilliance or something that's better, right? So it has this idea of good with it. Okay, so good in comparison to what? Well, the only way to know good is if somebody is wise enough to discern the difference between what is better and what is not, right? So what they're really doing when they're pursuing mastery is just evidence of wisdom in a particular field, right? So that's another aspect that we could look into. Master is not doing. Mastery is always in relation to a subject, right? So mastery of fill in the blank, right? Mastery of biking. Uh, you know, that's kind of weird. Mastery of writing. Mastery of screenplays. Mastery of accounting. Mastery of self, right? So there's multiple different some subjects don't even make sense that they have mastery in, but it makes sense, right? In terms of glamour, right? We can all say that we have mastery of walking since we can basically walk and do and execute however our feet move, whenever, wherever we want, because we've done it so much, we have a mastery for it. But it's not exactly everybody can do that. Everybody can do that, except for those who can't, and then they slowly build up mastery towards it, or they develop different systems so that they can basically do what they want, right? Um, yeah, it all depends. Uh, Mastery of thinking, mastery of a thinking technique. Okay, so it might be something specific, right? It's not entirely like would a master ever say, like, let's think of this dynamic. Would a master say, "I've mastered painting"? Would Leonardo da Vinci say, "I've mastered painting"? Well, if somebody says they mastered something, that means that there's nothing else, right? That means that basically that's it. Well, when we understand mastery, and mastery is just the ability to realize the self in the world, to realize the self through a particular medium, right? This is why it's so. When we look at the people that are incredible, like great, that more or less not. Sometimes we compare ourselves to, is that they have a drive to accomplish something or do something, or they're just exemplifying some sort of skill into the world that no other before them or after them has been able to emulate. Well, emulate, but I mean like actually realize that, right? They're completely unique. Well, the whole point, like what mastery is when you get it down to the base essentials, when we look at every single master, what they're trying to do is use a median of knowledge, right, of subject, to realize something about themselves. And that's why they pursue it so heavily, right? So imagine a master poet. Well, a lot of times poets and artists tend to have certain traumas, right? They might be, there might be various, that sounds like a little harsh. But the thing is that there might be some processes in their mind that might not be entirely based on secure attachments, right? And so they use a particular subject to try and rework through it so that they can realize something better, right? Or they can realize something that they've longed for, or something about themselves that isn't quote unquote there, but it is. And they're trying to realize it through the median of art and poetry and X, Y, and Z. And so when they experience problems in their life or something happens, they go to the pen and they write, and they write a story that's just bah, and then they write a poem that might be one of the best poems they ever wrote. And when we have, like, you can get to the point where there tends to be a correlation between when somebody is in extreme mania and the best stuff they've ever written, and also when they're in an extreme depression and then they go to the pen and then it flips into an extreme mania and they have just one of the most brilliant quote recoveries, or pull up before they hit the side of the mountain, and sometimes they don't pull up in time and they hit the mountain, but they use it as a median of knowing themselves and getting to the essence and medicating themselves, right? To find something about themselves and realizing it, right? They use mastery of a particular subject as a tool to realize the self in the world. Okay? So that's the premise of everything. And then they find a subject that most resembles, guess what? Themselves, right? So if they're particularly, analytical, scientific, right? They might go towards the sciences and become one of the next great, Maxwellians, or the Teslas or Steinmetz, right? Ridiculous, physicists and maybe philosophers and thinkers and or artists or just people that are just highly competent in a field of, painting or something like that, where they have a median that kind of that's more reflective of themselves than others, and then they pursue that to realize themselves more and more and more and more, to realize the ecstasy of knowing and getting to better, express what's in their head, because that's what they're trying to do, because our ideas of who we are more important to us than, you know, kind of, I don't want to say reality, but like in terms of physical, you know, touch, taste, smell, the senses, right? That's just information coming in, and we have a body to perceive information, right? But our idea of self is much more important to us. That's why we get super offended when somebody, may, confront a belief or a thought or something that we make, because what we make is an extension of ourselves, right? And that's what they're trying to do. They're gaining mastery so they can put themselves into the world and share it, right? Mastery and actualizing self. Yep. Mastery. Some people might not achieve mastery. Now, it's because they probably don't know. Well, they might achieve mastery in different ways that we wouldn't consider it normally, like as a great scientist or a great poet or a great writer in like one subject. They might actually, when you consider of realizing the self, there might be multiple subjects that have some aspect of us in them, and then we go in there, pick that aspect up, learn everything about that aspect, take that aspect and use it in something that's more pertinent to us, and it revolutionizes a field, right? Solving great problems usually comes when you outflank it from every possible angle and attack it from everywhere. You surround it, and then you attack the problem and fix it, right? So, some of the best ways to solve problems if you're stuck is to just go on the internet and click random questions and then answer a couple random questions. Just go down the thing and answer them. Or like in your head, not on the internet, of course, because that'd be strange. But you could just basically think of some random questions. Not you think of random questions, but just find a book of random questions and just see what your mind does and tries to relate it back. That's called lateral thinking. And that's also where polymaths come in, right? They learn so much about everything that, is interesting and fascinating about them, because what are they trying to do? They're trying to use the outside world that's reflecting themselves back, because that's what we do. We project ourselves into the world, and they're saying, I like that. Why do I like that? I want to learn as much about that as possible. Now can I use that in something else? Or like, now what do I do? And then it just becomes this curiosity train where they go from one thing to another to another and to another, and they gain all these resources, all this knowledge, all this wisdom that they can just contextualize. And then you have all this knowledge, right? Then you put it into a coherent form that's non-contradictory, and you basically have wisdom that turns into their model of how they see the world. So they get their feelers out of themselves, of what they like and what they don't like. They pull it in. They get rid of all the contradictions. Well, the ones that have mastery over life, because you could be a master in cobblering but be a total fool in the rest of somebody's life, right? But if you have a mastery of life, that's the evidence of wisdom, which you have all these principles, you put them all together, you synthesize a principle, and you get rid of the contradictions. That's wisdom, right? It's coherency, right? That's the difference between just a regular light bulb and a laser, right? If you had a 40-watt laser, you're going to burn through just about anything, okay? You have a 40-watt light bulb, you can, read this book, read this journal or whatever. But, you have a 40-watt laser, you'll burn a hole through the journal and the room next door and the house next door and the light post through the house, hitting the pavement, burning a hole in the pavement. So coherency is what makes things incredibly powerful. So if you can't build the strength, you build you put all that strength into one singular point, and you'll break just about anything, right? Break just about anything. Like if you imagine a board or whatever, that's the difference between somebody hitting a board with a sledgehammer and shooting it with or shooting it with a bullet of some kind, right? That's the difference. It's all this power right into a little point. What's next? Yeah, and it's also like when we look at it, mastery doesn't happen in isolation either, right? You have to have others, because you have to have some reflection in the world, right? Imagine you go into a restroom, and there's one, there's, you do whatever, and then you come out, and then there's a mirror and you're like, why is one mirror super cloudy, I can't see myself, and the other mirror is super clear? Now, automatically, what would you do? You stepped in front of the mirror, you didn't notice it, you looked up, it's cloudy, and you look over to the other one, and that one's not cloudy. You're like, screw this. And then you go over and you find the one that you can see yourself better. We'd all do that. We'd all do that, right? So what are we doing in the world? Now, that's an analogy, okay? And I already made a video on analogies, but that's what we're doing when we find our preferences, what we like and what we don't like, right? Because guess what? We could do one of two things. Find a clearer mirror or clean up the cloudy mirror, right? So we look at the things that we hate. That's cleaning the mirror. Finding ourselves in the things that we hate, right? And then being like, oh, I didn't realize that this was a part of myself that wasn't actually integrated. Or we find a mirror that's super clear, that's clearer than every other one, and we just pursue that and pursue it and pursue it and pursue it. And if you're super wise, you'll do both at the same time. And that's what you like and what you don't like. Until eventually they become the same thing and they make a coherent self, right? And that's what mastery is. And then also, we're doing this process, right, of doing stuff, of realizing the self. But also there's the process of sharing that and bringing it out in the world, right? The things that we make, the things that we say, the things that we create is pretty much an extension of ourselves, of what we're capable of what's our power, of what's our choices, of the things that we brought together, materialized, and then offered into the world, of literally bringing elements together, assembling them, and bringing them to the world in a way that has never been done before, because nothing can ever be redone, right? Because everything's always slightly different, right? Right, and it wouldn't make sense to say, oh, you have all these cool aspects, you're perfect, you're integrated, you're always pursuing it, and then not say anything to anybody else, right? Because if we're trying to realize something great, we want to share it. Everybody wants to share the things that they think, the things that they believe, the things that they make with others. But sometimes, it might be considered a threat if they reject it. Right? It's not offering the thing in the first place. It's just what other people would perceive, and then we take that as fear and we hold it in, and that's not really exactly if we thought of something good, and because all these behaviors helped us survive when we were. It's kind of storming outside, but helped us survive or live or do something, and get our needs met. But then sometimes we don't have to do that. We don't have to do that anymore. And so we can branch off and do other behaviors that are alien and foreign to us, but they work far better. It's just that we don't have that first-hand knowledge yet. And once we do, it's a lot easier. Also, another aspect of mastery is that a great master would never say that they're a master, because they're always pursuing the self. You never realize the totality because it's the journey, right? But what are they doing? They're just realizing more, integrating more, and pursuing more, because and then we'll get into the video of what does it really mean when somebody says they know nothing, right? And this will make sense, but what they're doing is that they're just realizing more and more of the self. And if that's the thing that everybody is striving for all the time, whether they know it or not, it makes perfect sense why they don't stop until they literally can't do it anymore. Right? And literally they can't, Darwin, when you look at Darwin, he wrote his last paper 2 days before he died. I think it was his paper, or he was sending a message on trying to organize some meeting between scientists or some scientific thing. 2 days later, he died. He was still doing the thing that realized the maximum self to the day he died, and he loved it. Wouldn't that be amazing? Because the only reason why anybody would do that is if there's something if that subject was so connected with us, we loved it so much, because it means the world to us, and the only thing that really means is the aspect of ourselves that we really appreciate and really admire. Yeah. So that's mastery. It's the use of us. And when you look at geniuses, they also view this. They use the subject that they're learning and studying and becoming a genius in, right, as a way of enlightenment, right? It's enlightenment of the self through the reflection of some subject. That's mastery, or at least mastery is the evidence of that happening, that they found that. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I'd love to hear your comments below. Ooh, ghosts. All right, goodbye.